Let's get started now with our next section, the 7 Kings of Rome. Actually, before we jump into it, let's just quickly catch up on our story. So where did our story start with? Who was our mythical character that we started our story with?
Ulysses.
Who?
That's his name, right?
Aeneas. Or you might have been thinking Anchises.
Oh, I was thinking from Homer.
Oh, way back. Okay, so our mythical ancestor of the ultimate founders of Rome was Aeneas. Aeneas, the son of Anchises. Anchises was a prince of Troy. His mother, Venus. He escapes the Battle of Troy. He makes his journey all the way across the Mediterranean Sea over into central Italy there. And the Latinus and the Latins are already there. Now, he calls them Aborigines. Latinus has a daughter, Lavinia, that Aeneas marries. Latinus dies, and Aeneas becomes king of both people, and from there on out, they're called the Latins. His son here goes and founds the city of Alba Longa. Alba Longa is now going to be the capital city of the Latins, so to speak. Their most prominent city. It's not like they're all organized together. They're just a bunch of different cities, but they kind of have loose bonds, and it's understood that Alba Longa is their central city. So he sets up Alba Longa. We're just looking at a bunch of kings at Alba Longa. That's what all these green were, kings at Alba Longa. And we got all the way down to Numitor, and we talked about how he was overthrown by his brother, but his grandsons Romulus and Remus helped reestablish him. Romulus and Remus decided not to be kings of Alba Longa and to go found their own city of Rome. Quick picture of kind of a made-up map. So Alba Longa right there. So initially they had these two cities. This was the city Latinus had. This was the city founded by Aeneas. Aeneas became king of both, and then his son found Alba Longa, and that becomes capital city of the Latins, and they spread out from there. Romulus and Remus go back up by the Tiber River, where they were supposedly drowned, and that's where they're going to found their city of Rome. So we covered the story of Romulus and Remus last time, and
I did some Google mapping, and it's a 7-hour walk from that lake to Rome.
From Alba Longa to Rome?
Yep. 5-hour run.
There we go. Okay. And we remember their dispute about the hills. They ended up settling on the Palatine Hill, and this is the hill that they're going to build Rome on. Forget the exterior border here, but the Palatine Hill, Rome is now officially built as a city, and it now officially has its king, Romulus, the first king of Rome, 753 BC, being its legendary founding. Go ahead.
What was the name of the wall that went around it?
The Pomerium.
Okay.
The Pomerium is the boundary around it. Maybe the wall, maybe not the wall. But yes, the boundary around the city, what marks off Rome from the outside world. So you're going to have Romulus, and we're going to quickly run through the 7 kings of Rome. After the 7th king, we get to Rome's Senate. Now, I'm going to make this historical note once, and then we'll forget it. But each of these kings rules for an unusually long period of time. It's not strange for one king to have a rule of 30 years, but to have it back to back to back to back is very unusual. Most historians think that these are somehow groupings of kings together. But the story the Romans told themselves is that they only had 7 kings, and so we're going to cover what the 7 kings were supposed to have done. And now we're going to cover Romulus as the king of Rome going forward. All right, any questions on the setup really quick? Anything you want refreshed upon, or you're just ready to jump into it? Ready to jump. Okay. Remind ourselves of the settings here. So Rome is that little star on the map. Right there. And Rome is right there. To the north, we have the Etruscans. You can kind of see it as a darker color there. The Etruscans, they're not organized together in one empire. There are a bunch of city-states, but there are a bunch of city-states united together with treaties. And to the south, you have the Greeks. The Romans are right there just north of the Latins. They're nobodies at this time. Just their one little dinky city-state. We are going to be focusing on, all our laps are going to be really zoomed in on this square over and over again. That's what we're going to care about. So we're going to be really zoomed in on that. That's what this is. And a bunch of our maps are going to be zoomed in right here on Rome. Maybe a little bit more zoomed out, but on central Italy. So try to keep in mind the scale that we're talking about. Relative to the world, small potatoes. All right, so setting up, here's Rome. The major cities that we're going to mention a lot are Fidene and Veii, both Etruscan cities. So there's the Etruscans. They go way up there. We're just going to be looking at cities clear at their south end. So with that, let's start with what Rome did, what Romulus did right after he killed Remus. He built his city. Now he's got his city. He's the king of Rome. First thing he decides to do is he needs to expand the population of his city. He needs to get people to come to Rome. So he sets up what he calls the asylum. Now you might remember that he was on the Palatine Hill. There was another hill over here called the Capitoline Hill. He designates that land. He calls it the asylum. And he makes it open to anyone in Rome. Livy specifically makes mention of fugitives, exiles, runaway slaves, criminals, and foreigners. They were all invited to come to Rome and get asylum, live at the asylum. It was the name of that place. Expand to the second hill. And in that way, expands his population. And it was very effective, and a bunch of men loved the deal. I can go be a citizen there at Rome. I'll go to Rome. And so he attracts a big population this way. There's a problem with the population that he's attracting. You're thinking they're criminals. And you kind of got the right idea. If you were to go to a prison and you were to look at all the violent criminals in there, you'd notice that like 98% of them are male. And that's the problem that he has. He's attracting a massive male population, not a lot of female population. So, city is kicking off. He's got a good population, a good workforce, but not a lot of women in the city. And so he says, I have this great city, but will be gone in a generation. So we'll see how he addresses that problem. But one of the first things he does is he organizes the military. We'll have a lot more to say about the organization of the military, but for our purposes now, it has about 3,000 infantry and 300 cavalry. It gives you a sense of the numbers that we're dealing with the population of the city. He organizes the Senate, the 100 fathers. Now what these are, because remember that he brought a bunch of not so desirable people to the city, the people who knew their fathers, whose fathers were of the bloodlines that were the initial bloodlines, he takes those people and he puts them together in an advisory council called the Senate. And from there on out, the fathers were the people who who could name their lineage down to them. They weren't these guys. They become the senators. They're the first Senate, and he splits it into, splits Rome for the first time into the patrician class and the plebeian class. The patricians are going to be the senators together with all their families and all their descendants there on out. The plebs are going to be everyone else. And it's very lopsided in terms of the population. Good so far? Another thing he does is he adopts having 12 lictors. This will be every king from here on out. 12 lictors, these are just personal little bodyguards that follow you around. They're your attendants, basically, taking care of you. It's said that the reason he chose 12 there was because his father sent him the 12 birds. That means like he won the competition. You remember the 12 vultures that landed on his hill? That's one of the arguments for it. Other argument is it was adopted from the Etruscan way of doing things, and the Etruscans were split up into 12 groups. So, could have been an Etruscan influence or something else. And then another thing that he started doing to signify that he was a king is he would put purple on the edge of his clothing. And purple is going to be an important color for the Romans going forward. It is a color of royalty. And so we'll see the color purple come up a lot in history. Go ahead.
Is it just his clothing or all the patricians?
His. This is special for the king. The king has his 12 lictors, his 12 attendants. Basically, he needs to make sure the city understands they need to respect the king. And so he's got to adopt things that will make his population respect him as a king. See him in some sense as their superior. And so these are the things he adopts. And then, we already said that, he splits Rome into the patricians and the plebeians, with the patricians being the senators and the family of the senators, and the plebeians being everyone else. Now, he initially and intentionally builds Rome beyond the needs of his population. So these guys, they get to work fast, and they're trying to build a very impressive looking city, trying to attract people to the city. It's kind of a marketing campaign. So he intentionally builds beyond the needs of the city. And then, since it's a predominantly male population, how are you going to get the females? He kind of does the same thing his great-great-great ancestor Aeneas did. He tries to negotiate treaties with local tribes. So he sends out a bunch of envoys to try and negotiate alliances, and as part of those alliances would be a right to marriage between the people of Rome and whatever tribe he's making that alliance with. Now, every single tribe that he tries to make this alliance with, they reject him outright. They're already getting worried about how fast the city of Rome is popping up. They, one, don't like who's being sought there. Two, since Rome built beyond its needs while they were trying to impress people, that kind of scares people. How is this city just popping up like this? And, well, those are the two big ones, so they're worried about Rome, and so they're afraid of assisting in growing Rome's population, so they're largely hesitant. Some of them flat out insult the Romans. They say the only way guys like you could find wives is if you made an asylum for women. In other words, you're going to have to find the criminal class of women if you want any women. You're not getting our daughters. Not a chance. So, on to plan B. What's plan B? If you can't get the father to give you the daughter, what do? You throw a big party. That's what you do. So his next plan is to throw a big party. He hosts a grand festival in honor of Neptune. He advertises it very well, invites all the locals to come participate in the party, and on top of that, it's a new city, and so it's your chance to come see Rome and enjoy the festivities and all that. It's going to be great. And it works. A ton of people show up to Rome for this great celebration. And they go, they pass out the wine, make sure the guys are getting nice and drunk. And when the time comes, they drive all the men out of the city and keep the daughters. Now, in particular, it was a bunch of Sabine women who were taken. So, looking at a map here, Rome, Alba Longa, the two initial cities that we talked about last week. Here's Rome. Well, they got tribes from all over the area. The bulk of the population came from Sabine tribes up here. And so that's why it's called the rape of the Sabine women, but it's not just Sabine women that were taken. All right, so they drive the men out of the city and they take the women, and now they got the women. First thing they had to do was console the women that they took. And so Romulus goes around and he addresses each of them and he says, look, we're not trying to make slaves out of you. We're trying to make wives out of you. You're going to share in all the property that Rome has. You're going to share in citizenship. You're going to share in all these rights. And so he tries to console them with their lot in life. To give you a more modern cultural reference, I think 7 Brides for 7 Brothers was supposed to be loosely based on this event. Gives you a flavor for what's going on here.
They talked about it.
Yeah, they were sobbing, not saying.
I know, it's so bad.
After
So-
they weren't sobbing anymore.
So Romulus goes around trying to console the women, let them know it's not as bad as you might think it is. Well, that's pretty bad.
Could be worse.
And then the second thing is he has all the men go and make individual pleas to the women that they've taken, making pleas along the lines of, you were just so beautiful, I couldn't help myself. I was just so taken with you. Girl like you, how could I resist? Those types of things. And apparently, it's fairly successful. And these girls take to their new lot in life fairly quickly. And so now, the girls at Rome, they've been contented. The parents of the girls and the families of the girls, not so much. They're still furious. Now, the tribes who aren't the Sabines, just local tribes around here, what ends up happening is they, in a rage, once they realize what's happened, they just gather up, throw together armies and march on Rome as fast as they can, trying to go get it back, kind of haphazardly. And Romulus, with his nice organized army and all his men, beats those armies no problem, and kills the king, gets ready to burn the cities. And what ends up happening over and over again is the daughters of the tribe end up pleading with Romulus to spare the population, and instead of killing them, just integrate them with Rome and make them citizens. So the tribe would go fight them, they fight a war, Rome would win, and then, due to the pleas of the girls that were just taken, Romulus, instead of killing them or enslaving them, would actually integrate them in the Roman population. So the Roman population starts growing this way. And so that happens tribe after tribe after tribe after tribe. Romulus, it's portrayed that he really quick gets a soft spot for these girls. And they're able to tug on him a little bit and get him to do things. Anyways, so that's with those tribes. Random tribes. The Sabines, since a bunch of them were from the Sabines and they're somewhat united together as tribes, they decide that they're not going to risk any small counterattack like that. They're going to take their time, be methodical, organize an actual army that they know can take on Rome, and then they're going to bring that army and march on Rome. So that's what the Sabines do. They take their time, nice big army, now they're marching on Rome with something that could potentially take Rome. Let's see. So I talked about the tribes retaliating. Okay, so now we've got the Sabines showing up at Rome. Let me find a map here. Here's roughly what Rome looked like at the time, looking down. Here's a Palatine Hill. You understand how this is showing you different elevations? Okay, on this hill, the Capitoline Hill, is where they had the asylum. So that's where all your fugitives went and started living initially. And one of the first things they do is they build a citadel on top of that hill as well, so that both hills are protected. So at this time, this hill also has walls around it, so both these have walls around it. Now when the Sabines show up, so their army's out here somewhere, don't know where exactly. When they show up, they bribe the daughter of the captain of the citadel. So the captain of the citadel, his daughter, they end up bribing her to let them inside the citadel. Now, the story goes, the most famous version of the story goes, that the Sabines, they would often wear kind of some big jewelry on their left hands, rings or bracelets or something like that, but gold. And so the story goes that the girl, what she asked for, her price, in order to let the Sabine army in the walls, is that they have to give her what they have on their left hand, meaning their jewelry. And so the story goes that there she is standing, and as the army's marching in, they all throw their shield on her, piling it up, crushing the poor girl to death.
What?
Because they hold their shields in their left arm. And she asked what was for her payment for what was in their left arm. So, careful what you ask for, I guess. Go ahead.
Did she actually die?
Remember that a bunch of this is just fictional. It's the story the Romans told themselves. We drift closer and closer to history, like the event of the Sabines and the Romans fighting and eventually coming together is probably real. Good reason to believe that. But the majority of our history prior to 390 BC was lost. And we're talking roughly 753 BC. So there could have been some event. It could have been the case that someone back there was bribed. I mean, that's almost a given, but how much that actual story made its way through, who knows? But the story the Romans told themselves. Anyways, so the Sabine army moves inside the citadel here, and they quickly take the citadel, so they've got the Capitoline Hill. And the Romans, they're back inside these walls, on top of the Palatine Hill. And between them is all this water. And so what ends up happening is they start fighting their battles in between the two hills, both of them going down into that valley, fighting down there. Now, unfortunately for them, there was a big flood right before the Sabines showed up. And so it was just mucky, terrible conditions, awful for everyone. And the fighting, it was pretty evenly matched. Occasionally, Rome would get the upper hand, and then the Sabines, and then the Romans and the Sabines. There were two pretty intense battles that both sides took decent losses. And it's in that second battle, there came a point, a famous warrior, Hostilius, doesn't matter, you'll know the name later, he ends up making sort of a last stand, so to speak, holding off some Sabines, and ends up falling in the act. When he falls, the Romans are getting ready to retreat. Romulus, making a quick prayer to Zeus, is able to turn him around again to push the momentum back. And so as they're driving the Sabines up the hill, it's looking like Rome has finally got the upper hand, and they're looking to end the war. And that's when the daughters of the Sabines end up running between the two armies, begging them to stop the fighting, saying that this war is happening because of the position that we're in, and that we would rather die than have to live without our husbands or live without our fathers. And so both sides are just stunned by it. Right? The fathers, they can't tell their daughter no. The guys, they can't tell their wives no. They're moved by this action. And so they agree that they'll put an end to the fighting. And so what ends up happening is the Sabines that were part of this tribe. Understand there's lots of Sabines. When I say Sabines, I mean a selection of Sabines. These Sabine tribes that were united coming down, they decide that they'll go ahead and unite with Rome as well. Now, because the Sabines are kind of on par with the Romans at this time, what they end up doing is doubling the Senate. So there's now 100 Roman senators, and there's 100 Sabine senators. So they end up just kind of doubling up on things. And then they end up making the king of the Sabines a co-king with Romulus. So Rome now has two kings, and there's both Sabine senators and initial Latin senators.
That's not gonna last.
No, it's not going to last. Okay, so some picture on the side of the Sabine women coming and interfering with the two guys fighting in the battle. Sorry, what?
Those babies.
Yeah. In part of the story, they brought the kids too to really try and get him to stop. They were determined to put an end to the fighting.
Very effective.
Yes, it was extremely effective. Everyone is moved by this action. The Sabine women are held in high regard from here on out, and things are named after the Sabine women to try and honor them for this event. But so they're held in high regard because of this event. Anyways, the Sabine king, his name was Titus Tatius, if you care. But this Sabine king, he's now sharing the throne with Romulus. Now, some relative of his does something naughty. Doesn't matter what it is. And so while he's out and about performing some ceremony at some different city that's not Rome, he's assassinated for it. Now Romulus, rather than go to war over this, just negotiates a treaty and they're back to good. And now Romulus is the sole king again. So they had 2 kings for 5 years, but then it's just back to Romulus. And there's no longer a Sabine king.
How convenient.
How convenient. Probably what Romulus thought. Anyways, so now you got the Sabines and the Latins together. Now they are the Romans, 200 senators, Romulus, sole king over Rome. Good so far?
Yeah.
And they've expanded to a couple hills, no longer just on the Palatine Hill. Okay, so with that, I'm now going to talk about the organization of the legion army. Because this is very closely tied to also the organization of their government. For Rome, your army and your government are very intertwined. There's hardly a difference between a good citizen and a good soldier, a good leader and a good general. So, talk about the organization of the Roman legions and the 30 curiae. So, Rome was composed now of 3 tribes. The Latins, the ones that were initially with Romulus, the Sabines, and then, this is the name of the other one. Not sure how you say it, if that's a C or a K. Luciers, Luciers, whatever. We know that Rome, at this time, was composed of 3 tribes. We don't know the origins of these guys. So we know that these were some of the initial Latins. This tribe was the initial Latins. This tribe was the initial Sabines. We don't know what the initial tribes these were. It's just been lost to history.
Were they the South tribes, perhaps?
There's some speculations that they're from Alba Longa. There's some speculations that they're actually Etruscans. But we've lost wherever that tribe came from. But Rome, at this time, now has 3 tribes of people coming together. Romulus organizes them into 30 curiae. Each tribe is split into 10 curiae. Each curiae, here's your responsibility. Your job is to provide 100 infantry to the army, every curiae, and 10 cavalry to the, I'm not sure, Soleres, something like that. But these guys were essentially the cavalry units or the king's guard, personal guard. Okay? So, one tribe is split up into 10 pieces. Each piece of the tribe, here's your responsibility. At this time, there isn't a notion of pay taxes. What you're required to contribute to the state is basically military. So this is what each piece of the tribe, each curiae, is responsible for providing. So that means that each tribe, which is composed of 10 curiae, is going to provide 1,000 infantry, each one under a tribune, the head of the tribe, and a total of 100 cavalry that go to the king's personal guard. 3 tribes for a total of 3,000 infantry and 300 cavalry. All that makes sense so far?
A tribune is 1,000.
Yeah, a tribune is the head of all the soldiers that came from his tribe. So each curiae contributes roughly 100 infantry. Speculation that they were under centurion, that could have been a later invention. But for sure, 1,000 infantry, all under the tribune. The head of the army coming from his tribe, and then the 3 tribunes come together and they're under the king. And the king directs the army. So it's often said you can think about them like captains and them as like lieutenants. And then the king is the general. Good so far? Now, these tribes are also a very important part of Roman politics, and they don't go away. Fast forward to the year of Julius Caesar, and tribes are still an important part of your politics. each tribe has its own internal structures and its own internal rules and its own internal laws. And not everything is mandated from top down. It's kind of like the same way that Arizona can have different laws from Utah under the United States. One tribe can have different rules than another tribe. And they have their own internal structures that they manage themselves. And even as a smaller component of that, it's similar for each household. Now I wrote household there instead of family to try and expand your notion of what this might be. A household could be a father together with his wife, some kids, a couple slaves, and a couple foreigners. They all come under the father. And the father is given a lot of license to rule his household as he sees fit. One of the stories goes that a kid wasn't even allowed into the household, a newborn baby, unless the father picked it up. And if he refused, it was left there to die. And that's up to the father to decide if he's going to accept him into the household. And you as a son are largely under the household of your father, even when you're a grown man, until he dies. And then the household is splitting up amongst the sons or however it's divided. And the tribe might have a lot of say in that. But so the households have a lot of power over your day-to-day life, whatever household you're a part of. And the tribe also has a lot of control over your day-to-day life, whatever tribe you're a part of. And then on top of that, there's the state of Rome and how it's over you. So kind of those three tiers. Any questions about that so far? All right, so now let's talk about how their government actually worked. Because you know that they had the Senate. And the Senate is probably the most famous part of the Roman government. The Senate at this time acts as nothing but advisors to the king. All they can do is suggest legislation. Nothing they say is binding. Now, as a rule, the king is constantly consulting with the Senate, getting their advice. As a common case, a king, until we get to the bad king, wouldn't ever judge on like a death penalty case without getting the advice of the Senate, for example. So there were norms that everyone followed, but nothing's written into the law. And the Senate is kind of powerless in terms of the law, but they were used as an advisory council. Now, everything comes under the king. So the army answered directly to the king. He was the head of the army. The king held all the legislative, executive, judicial power, and then he was also the head of the religious power. We don't really think about this aspect of a government, but it's a huge part of these ancient governments. The king was considered your pontifex, which by its etymology meant bridge builder. He's the one who connects the people with the gods. One of the big transitions when we go from the monarchy to the republic is the republic is now placing voting on the leaders that they want versus it somehow being divinely appointed your king over you. So the king is still in a very divine position. It's a religious position, as well as having all the regular powers we would expect a government to have. Now, I put an asterisk next to legislative here, because technically the king had to have his legislation passed upon by the assembly of the Curia. Those 30 groups, they would approve legislation. Now, how would they vote on this? Understand that these are the same people as your soldiers. The same 100 people that a Curia puts up as its soldiers are also the same 100 people that represent them when it comes to voting. So it's not everyone voting. Your soldiers are your voters. They're one and the same thing. And so you might think about it as each of those centuries, each of those 100 people, when they go to vote, they talk internally amongst themselves, and then they vote as a single unit, yes or no, for whatever the law is. Okay, so I said that the Senate didn't have really any powers. There is one big power that the Senate did have. And the big power that the Senate did have is what happens when a king dies. Remember that up to this point, there was only one time that Rome was really in trouble, and that's when they were trying to decide who should be the next king, Romulus or Remus. So they got a nice system in place now to pick who the next king will be. Here's what the process was. When the king dies, a senator is appointed the interims, which means that they are essentially king for 5 days. And so they take on all the responsibilities of the king for that 5 days, because someone's got to run the government. It's all on the king. So that guy acts as the governor, or acts as the king for 5 days. During that 5 days, it's his job to try and find the next replacement king. So while he's a king, one more thing he's got on his plate is it's his job to find the next king. So he goes and he'll find the next king that he thinks should be king, and he'll place him before the Senate. And the Senate has to approve him as king. If my 5 days go by and I can't pretend we're the Senate, If my 5 days go by and I can't get you guys to agree on some candidate being king, I instantly lose that power after 5 days, and it goes to another person in the Senate. And they're now the interrex for 5 days. And it's their job to find the next king. Go ahead.
Are there any qualifications to become king, or do they just appoint anyone who's worthy?
The senators are the one choosing, so I'm not sure if there would have been any qualifications, but they're most likely just picking amongst the senators.
How did they pick the interrex? Was it democratic?
We've lost a lot of this. There's some stuff to suggest that they kind of pick one amongst themselves really quick because they understood it's kind of dire, we just got to pick one. There's other stuff that literally says that suggests to me that there could have been a pecking order that was just understood. And it just went through the pecking order, whatever it was.
So they didn't do just, voting like we do today?
They didn't vote on the interrex, but they did vote on the king.
Okay.
They could have voted on the interrex. That one I'm more fuzzy on. But quickly select someone to make sure someone's running the government. And on top of this, they only get for 5 days so that they don't get comfortable thinking that they're the new king, while we find the next person to be the king. So now, if I found someone that you guys approve of, I found someone the Senate approves of, then we go through the approval process. What's up?
Can the interrex nominate themselves?
I don't know. It's not that specific. But if they did nominate themselves and everyone says no, then just on to the next guy. Okay, so if I finally find someone that you, the Senate, agrees with, and you say, okay, that's our guy, that doesn't mean he's king yet. Next, we have to take him to the public assembly. The public assembly is the assembly of the Curia. Those guys now have to get together, and they just give a simple yes or no vote. Will you accept this guy as your king? We'll follow the case where they say yes, because they almost always did once the Senate chose someone. If they say yes, then you have to now go and consult all your religious officials, all your priests, to make sure that there's no bad omen saying that this guy shouldn't be the guy. Again, this was usually just a rubber stamp. And then finally, the candidate, once he's approved, has to go back in front of the assembly of the people and ask them for what they call imperium. Imperium is my right to rule over you as a king, essentially. And then with that, once they were granted imperium, a new king was selected.
You mean this? Public could say no, theoretically?
Yes, the public could say no. I will not follow this man as my king.
How would they go about doing that, though?
Yeah, so many people.
You break up into these curiae, these groups,
again?
30 groups of 100. So remember, it's not all the people.
Okay, they're representatives, kind of.
Kind of. Your soldiers are your representatives.
That's good.
Those who do the fighting run the government. Same thing. And that's going to be the case for a lot of this, a good chunk of this early history.
That's quite common.
Yeah. And there's reasons for that. Aristotle, when he does his analysis of all the different types of governments that people set up, one of the ones he notes is they try to set up these systems where we'll have this group of people be the soldiers, these guys be the farmers, these guys be the artisans, and we'll split up the power that way. And every single time that governments like that got set up, these guys eventually realize, we're the army, we can do whatever we want. And they end up enslaving the other two groups of people. And so he points out that the best way to do it is to just force everyone to participate in that responsibility. And that preserves the power. Your citizen soldiers. Anyways, so that's the approval process. If the Senate does not approve of the candidate in 5 days period, then an interrex selects a new interrex to replace him. Is one potential way it was done, or there was a pecking order. And that's roughly the way that this early monarchy ran. That gives you a sense for the government and how the military and the government closely tied together. Any questions on that? All right, so there's the government of Romulus. Now, once Rome, notice what Rome has been doing this whole time, growing like crazy. Beating tribes, integrating them, beating the Sabines, and basically doubling their population, constantly expanding as they build on these hills. And so the Etruscans to the north are starting to become a little bit nervous of the city down there. In particular, there's an Etruscan city, Fidene, I'll probably pronounce it, Fidene, and then Veii, not sure how you say it. Those are going to be the two cities most anxious about this new city, Rome, that's growing up right next to them. So the first one to get involved is Fidene. They go and they basically start plundering the lands around Rome, just making havoc, taking resources, doing what they can to try and slow the growth of Rome. And then when the Romans come out, they run back to their city. Now, Romulus doesn't want to try sacking their city, and so here's what he decides to do. They're up in their city. What he does is, here's the road out of the city. There's some bushes about a mile away. He has about half of his army hide behind the bushes. So you got chunky guys over there, chunky guys over there. And he tells his men to kind of run intimidatingly, but kind of recklessly, at the gates. Now, why is this a good strategy? We need to understand a little bit about ancient war. In ancient battles, it was not the case that when two armies face off each other, they just fight to the death, and whoever's left is left. What ends up happening is two armies come fighting together until one army gets afraid that their side's going to lose. Once one side is afraid that their side's going to lose, they try running off the battlefield. And there's kind of a perverse incentive here. If you're fighting in the army, and you're on the lines, and you think your side's going to lose, the first person to flee is most likely to survive. The first ones who run away and realize my side's going to lose, they're going to live. It's the ones who realize too late that their side's running away who are in trouble. And this is actually when the majority of casualties happen in the fight. It's not when the actual fighting is going on. It's when one army tries to flee, and then they just get mowed down. And so in ancient battles, it's not the best army wins all the time. A lot of the time, it's the army with the best morale wins. That's why a lot of these early battles, generals are standing right there at the front. Because, you know, my general's not stupid. If he knew that we were going to lose, he'd already be running. So I can wait till he starts running before I start running. And so when you see these Romans charging at you in this haphazard way, your thought is, that's not very organized. We can come out here, make a stand, scare them, push them. When we go running the other way, we will mow these guys down and we'll hardly even have to fight. So that's the plan. So Romulus and his men, they run up to the gates in a somewhat haphazard way. The Sabines say, this is an easy fight. They go outside the gates, make a quick stand, pushing them back, and the Romans run away, and they feint a retreat. And so the Sabines, or not the Sabines, the people from Fidene, this city right here, they realize this is our opportunity so that we don't even have to fight a future battle. And so they go chase them down to get their easy kills. And when they get far enough, the Romans all just turn around and kind of stop them in their tracks and start fighting. And these guys come out from the sides. And when you're standing there fighting, and you see the army that should be afraid of you is now turning around, and there's guys coming from the sides, and so we're not sure how many people there are, this is a bad idea. I'm going back to my city. And so that's exactly what they do. They turn around and they try running back to their city, with now the Romans hot on their tails. The difference is the Romans were ready for this. They planned for this. And so as quickly as they're able to get into the city, the Romans are following right behind them before they could even close the gates. And so in that way, they're able to take the city with hardly a fight. And that's how Fidene becomes a Roman city and is no longer a Etruscan city. And with this case, Rome does not do what they typically do, which is destroy the city, move the population, and put them at Rome. They want that city on that river. That's a very useful city for trading purposes, control of the river. So from here on out, there's going to be a lot of fighting about that city. You might wonder, you'll hear of lots of other cities that they destroy and just move the population. This won't be one of those cities. It's a very useful city because of its location. Any questions so far? All right, so after that, we hear another Etruscan city, seeing essentially their ally get wrecked this way, they decide that they're going to go cause problems for Rome. And so they go and they do a similar thing, you know, burning the farmland around Rome, whatever they do, looting, plundering.
Across the river?
Across the river.
Okay.
And then when the Romans come out to face them, they run back to their city. And this time they stay in their city walls. They're not going to fall for the same trap.
Across the river?
Across the river. It wasn't, there they are, we chase them down. It's, here you are in the city and you're getting these reports that they're out there raiding wherever they're out there raiding. And by the time you go out to try and find them in the battle, they've already left. So time and distance separates these events. And so the Romans can't really do anything about it. These inside their city. So instead what they do is they kind of just start plundering the land around them, trying to draw them out of their city. Which works. And they come out and they fight the Romans outside their city. And Levy says there is no stratagem by which Romulus wins the battle. And they just straight up fight it out, and Rome just comes out on top, having the more veteran troops. More trained for war. And so they just beat them straight up in a battle. They goes back inside their walls. Rome's not going to stand there and plunder them, so just take what they can around the land, and then they go back to Rome. They get some land for a bit in the transition, but they end up creating a treaty between the two, and they're back to on good terms. 100-year treaty. 100-year truce is signed between the two. Any questions so far? So that gives you a sense for Romulus, very much a conqueror, very much expanding Rome's influence and expanding the city of Rome. Now, the story goes that while he was addressing his army or addressing his people, a big storm comes, and Romulus is taken up in the storm to become a deity, a god. That's one version of the story. The other version of the story goes that during this great storm, the senators intentionally blocked him from the view of the other people, and they killed Romulus. I leave it to you to guess which of those is more likely. And then they told the people that Romulus had ascended in the storm, and that he was now a god, and they had the name for their god, Quirinius, whatever, and he was now the god of the Roman state.
Well, why would the Senate not like Romulus?
So the Senate was never too keen on Romulus. The army loved Romulus, and the people loved Romulus. For whatever reason, the Senate didn't like him so much. And so the thinking goes that once Romulus had sufficiently pacified the region, the senators said to themselves, we no longer need this warlike king. We've gotten what we need out of Romulus. He's done a great job as a general. We don't need a general anymore. Let's get rid of him and we'll get our own guy in. We don't know all the internal politics of what this could have been because who knows what would have happened. Who knows what actually happened. But that's the way the story goes. And so Romulus ultimately killed or taken in a storm, ruled for supposedly 37 years. And that's the end of the kingship of Romulus. Any questions?